This meeting.
Hey, well, I'll go ahead and get us started. Good morning. My name is Andrea Sobrato, and I'm the Senior Associate Director at CFPIC. It is an honor to welcome each of you to today's webinar, Enhancing AB 2083 Effectiveness Through Interagency Placement Committees. Today's webinar is fueled by the momentum of the dynamic state and county leadership across California, actively advancing the implementation of AB 2083 within a whole child framework. Our discussion today is really just a small representation of aligned thinking and shared commitment to the individual children, youth, and families in every community. Today's content and objectives are really a direct follow-up from this spring's AB 2083 regional convenings. The webinar will pick up right where we left off. Both during those convenings and in our closing surveys, county teams shared that they wanted more opportunities to talk with each other about strategies that leverage cross-system partnerships to extend support, tailored innovations, and culturally responsive resources to children and youth within the context of their culture, families, tribes, and important relationships. And by spotlighting the exciting and important work of IPC teams, we're going to hone in on where those cross-system partnerships are making such an enormous difference for children, youth, and families. This morning's agenda will give us the opportunity to be grounded in the legal and operational framework for IPC functions and how those align within the system of care framework. We're going to hear directly from clients doing some great work and then have about 20 minutes for a peer-to-peer county discussion. It is a lot to pack in 90 minutes, but if you are an IPC team that would like to continue to feed into this work with other county teams, we will commit to supporting you. We will close the webinar by inviting interested IPC teams to take advantage of some opportunities for TA and support. We are committed to supporting IPC work in counties for the next few years because we view that the work that IPC teams do every day is at the heart of where cross-system collaboration has its highest impact on child trauma recognition and response, family finding, and ensuring that the continuum of care for each child is tailored to promote safety, healing, and permanence. I'd like to thank the webinar's wonderful planning team, composed of each of the state agencies who participate in the system of care, and the associations that represent the respective work at the local level, not to mention the state's incredibly important joint resolution team, which supports the implementation of AB 2083 at the local and state level. I would especially like to thank CWDA's Director of Policy for Children and Adult Services, Diana Boyer, who continues to invest in advocacy, capacity building, and solution generation for children and adult services, and the 15 child welfare directors who have guided this work through their participation on our Complex Care Capacity Building Grant Steering Committee, two of which have joined the planning team. A special thanks to Joan Miller from San Francisco and Terry Badia from LA. CFPIC's Capacity Building and System Integration Program Director, Laura Kozwicki, a few more grounding comments.
Thank you, Andrea. So as Andrea mentioned, CFPIC System Integration Team has been funded to support cross-county teams representing behavioral health, child welfare, regional centers, county office of education, probation, and many others to work together to innovate solutions and to leverage all resources to address the needs of children and youth who are involved in multiple systems. We are researching and hoping to support and lift up innovative models of care for youth with complex care needs, including ways to leverage all fiscal and program resources, including new initiatives such as CalAIM and BH Connect. We are chasing down these new initiatives, as well as all of the county innovations happening across the state. And we want to share the great work that counties are doing and ensure that they can then share and inspire others. Our hope is that AB 2083 and IPC teams can walk away today with tangible next steps to build upon the great work that is already happening across the state and in different counties. I will quickly turn it over to Peter Guan, our program manager, to just go over a few housekeeping details.
Thank you, Laura. We are recording the training and we will post it and the PowerPoint slides on our website.
Our CFPIC website hosts a variety of trainings, webinars, FAQs, and other resources. I will drop that link into the chat, which will be the same link that will eventually host today's webinar materials.
All right, thank you, Peter. So today's webinar will be facilitated by Richard Connect, Integrated Human Services Group Managing Partner and longtime system of care leader in California. Richard is both an innovator and thought leader who has championed the design and early implementation of a whole child ecosystem in the state. We are fortunate that he is a great partner at CFPIC and willing to guide our work around our visioning of IPC. So Richard, I will turn this over to you, but lastly, I just also wanted to remind folks that we will be going over discussion and opportunities for counties to receive technical assistance at the end of this webinar as well. So thank you, Richard.
Laura, thanks. Peter, Laura, Andrea, the team at CFPIC, really appreciate your leaning into the unique opportunity that California has now to support whole child work through the system of care efforts. And thank you all for joining us today. I see lots of familiar faces. Happy soggy Friday to you. At least it's soggy here in Northern California. Happy to be with you. Some of you might know me from some state level consultation. And please know that today the conversation comes from experience gleaned from the field. I do not speak for the state today, so nothing's authoritative today. We're talking about enhanced practice here that's not obligatory. Just want to clarify up front that we're not doing statute and code change today. We're just talking about what's possible. We would like to start off with a little poll, and so we've got a question here that we'd love to invite you to, and Andrea's going to tee this up for us. But some of you have already put into chat who you're with, and thank you for introducing yourselves. But I think we've got a formal poll, Andrea, that we're going to roll out. Is that right? That people can jump into here in just a second. There we go. So we're interested in knowing which part of the ecosystem you're in. So thank you for jumping into that. Super helpful for us for context. All right. So we have nice participation. Thank you. I'll give you just another couple of seconds for a few other folks to join in there. Lots of welfare and behavioral health folks here, and love that our regional center partners are here. Thank you for joining us from our probation education sides of the system, and love that we've got a managed care person here who can explore this from a Medi-Cal managed care organization perspective. Really appreciate that. And I think we'll go ahead and share results, Andrea, if it seems right. Is that enough time, do you think?
Sure.
All right.
Can y'all see those results?
Are folks seeing those?
Yes, I can see it.
Great. Fantastic. All right. Thank you for that. Really, really helpful context. As we go forward today, would love to have you also potentially just use chat if you've got something in particular you're pondering on relative to your IPC enhancement work, or how you can effectively use IPC in your partnerships. Would welcome additional reflection through chat. There'll be ample opportunity again for you to bring forward some questions as we get towards the end of the day, and we can talk amongst ourselves relative to what you're thinking. But feel free also to go there and do some sharing about what might be curious in your minds about that. Got some kind of objectives in addition to what Laura already primed for us. Thanks for that. We hope that by the end of our time today, you'll come away with some ideas about how interagency placement committee process, as captured within your Assembly Bill 2083 work, and carried out by your system of care partners could be potentially enhanced or expanded or improved. Underscoring this first objective here is an awareness that youth with complex needs were almost always children with basic needs, right? And that those basic needs, if they can be met by system partners in a timely way, then we have far fewer youth who evolve into complex situations, if you will. And so the IPC conversation presents us with an opportunity to address that. A second goal for today would be to begin to think about what action steps might be to enhance your local practice. And we hope that by also joining us today, you'll become aware that there are, as Andrea mentioned, going to be technical assistance opportunities for you coming forward. If your local system partners want to dive into re-engineering, expansion, improvement, enhancement of your IPC or interagency service coordination process for young people with complexity, you're in the right place. The big goal for today, of course, is that we're here to help you and your partners implement your system of care work. This is the IPC process is, when done well, really the heart and soul of good system of care work. And so I'm going to set some historical context here. I'm going to race relatively quickly through this context and background, if you will, because we do want to avail ourselves of the expertise from our friends in Calaveras and some of our other counties who are kind of leaning in recent years to adaptation of IPC. Thrilled to have Maylee and Christina, and we'll introduce them formally to you in a few minutes with us. You know, historically that there are kind of essential basic obligations on the IPC process. It's a pathway into STRTP, right? Or to other intensive services, including community treatment facilities. Many of you use IPC to access wraparound services. Additionally, there are expectations, I think, that the IPC can be used to review case plans for young people who are already in STRTPs, right? And in the last few years, to just ensure that the determination process as required by FFPSA Part 4, the qualified individual work, to make sure that that's contextualized, right? And that you're still making good shared decision making. So this would be kind of baseline practice, if you will, of IPC. The statute and code for interagency placement committee work is rooted in a couple places in the Welfare Institutions Code. It dates back to probably 30 years ago or so. And it's important to understand contextually that it was crafted at the time. The code that we're currently left with at this point was crafted without a full awareness of the effects of long-term congregate care on foster youth, right? Like, if you're old like me, you might remember that we used to think that group homes were perfectly acceptable places to raise kids. And we now know 30 years later that they're not. In fact, they're profoundly unhealthy places to raise kids, right? You all know the research on this, that it's often congregate care settings, long-term anyway, that lead to adverse young adult outcomes. The original intent, of course, was to have a process that allowed child welfare, behavioral health, and probation partners to see the needs of children and youth from a whole child perspective and to develop a shared understanding about how to meet those needs. And it represents, historically anyway, one of the first kind of threads, if you will, or the first attempts to link systems together. It's all pre-KDA, right? Pre-CCR. But the IPC process was among the state's first efforts to kind of bring partners together to make good shared decision-making for kids and families. What's happened in the last few years, which is important contextually, and some of you might be in counties where you've experienced these drivers, if you will. We had the pandemic, right? And we developed this unique digital capacity for teaming. And now in many counties, we know that IPC process often involves the use of remote encounters, which creates kind of interesting dilemmas for us. And so that's a pressure, right? We've mentioned already the FFPSA Part 4 dilemma in terms of ensuring that the individualized, independent determination of need and the matching of need to the provider is done. And this creates pressure, right, on the IPC process, if you will. Many of you are in counties where there are workforce challenges. There are also many initiatives underway that create a certain kind of developmental fatigue for systems. These challenges have, in some partnerships, led to a de-emphasis of IPC and to interagency decision making, right? Where we've kind of lost the initial vision on some level for what shared holistic decision making between organizations might mean. Since the code was written, some other wonderful things have happened. In addition to those pressures and drivers, we got great stuff happening. So we're deep into continuum of care reforms and the reductions in congregate care, profoundly positive outcomes, right? We now have an expectation for child family teaming across the system that didn't exist just a few years ago. There have been significant expansion. This is really important context. There has been significant expansion of our community and school-based resources. So our partners adjacent to welfare and probation and behavioral health have now many more resources and opportunities to keep kids in community, in school, at home, out of trouble, that we didn't have these 25 years ago in California, right? There were some. This list here on the screen, a little bit small and font, apologies. It's just a partial list, right? So we're doing Medi-Cal work in schools. We have a developing Medi-Cal funded wraparound program that's coming in the next year or so, at least an opportunity to do that. You have school-based local accountability plan work for foster youth or those at risk of. The state did unwind many years ago now, AB 3632, and so schools get behavioral health dollars through AB 114. There are community schools being developed all across the state. So this is a sampling of the resources, the richness of the continuum that was not present when IPC was drafted many years ago. And the fourth element here, you all probably know, particularly if you're in the welfare world anyway, you know that there's pending rates modification work that's going to be critical to understand as we engage young people and their families in terms of identifying needs and where they can best get those needs met, right? So all of that is contextualized to this. Deeper contextualization and awareness that your system of care work under 2083 is intended to create a broad, flexible array of services and supports for a defined population that is coordinated, integrated, that manages service and care and decision-making across multiple levels and builds meaningful partnerships. This is the definition of your system of care that comes from the research, right? Some of you know this. This comes from the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. The Interagency Placement Committee process is the place where your partners share risk, responsibility, resources, and reward, the 4 R's of system of care. Care coordination is not just IPC centered, right? So healthcare, human systems, social services systems have been trying to effectively coordinate care for decades, right? You may have had personal experience tapping into your own healthcare or the healthcare of a loved one and know it's kind of a chore sometimes to get care coordinated between various providers. We talk often in the state about whole person care, whole child care, and no wrong door pursuits. Those don't happen without care coordination. And particularly for young people with complex needs, IPC is the place we do that, right? And so we have another slide with more detail on this in a second, which I'll cut to. But the MOU that your system of care leadership team has signed off on, the critical intentionality of that is to align in at least 5 areas to coordinate care. So IPC is one of those, and we'll visit this in a little more detail in just a second or two. Important context again is that while AB 2083 has initially focused on foster youth with trauma, really important to understand that interagency care coordination for young people who've experienced trauma can't fall solely to 3 partners within your system. It's everybody's challenge and obligation and opportunity, right? If we're going to do this well. And most recently, under AB 153, we have an expectation for ourselves in practice that our tribes and tribal partners are critical partners in bringing forward connections to tribal involved families, indigenous families in community, right, and to the networks that serve them within the tribal service community. Here's a quick look visually at both the complexity of interagency placement and service coordination, but also the opportunity, right? Like this is just a kind of a high level summary of the various resources that our interagency placement committee partners do or can bring to the table, right? So sometimes we tell ourselves when young people have complex needs that we don't have enough. There's a scarcity of dollars or services or supports, what have you. And while as an individual agency, that probably is true that I might not have enough if I'm just one entity. When I bring myself into alignment with partners consistently through something like IPC, that scarcity is mitigated. Like my partners have resources that I don't have, and my families that I serve can potentially get access to them increasingly in California with great flexibility. So you'll hear this theme over and over again. Here's that other slide I mentioned a minute or two. These are your 11 elements that your system of care leadership team has agreed to. And they've signed a document saying to the state, this is how we're going to implement our whole child approach for young people in the foster care system. Notice via the arrows here that at least 5 of these 11 elements are fundamentally contingent on our ability to coordinate care and services, right? And that's by design. These 11 things, when done consistently over time, months and years, honestly, right, to implement them all because it's complex work. But when we do this over time, we get better outcomes for kids. We get more job satisfaction, less burnout, less turnover, right? We get all the good benefits of being in a whole person system when we do this over time. And the coordination of care is central to all of that system of care work. This is a super busy slide, which you'll get at some point in a PDF version after the webinar today. But just know that in a system of care environment, as we've defined it in California, a system of care is not just probation, behavioral health, and welfare. By definition in California, the system includes regional center partners, tribes, and school systems, right? Or at least the County Office of Education. And that's powerful because there are unique implications for schools. And what you'll hear highlighted in our guest presenters from Calaveras, and you may hear others talk about this in our peer-to-peer time, is that there are needs of young people in our classrooms that can be met via intensive care coordinations through something like IPC or akin to IPC, if you will. So while it may lack the authoritative capacity that your traditional IPC has, IPC can be adapted to be consultative, right, and helpful to kids in parallel systems, effectively keeping them, if we resource them effectively, we keep them out of the default systems of welfare and probation. I hope this is resonating with folks, that this idea of utilizing a broader approach to interagency service coordination for kids that are at risk, we effectively keep them at home, in school, out of trouble, right? Which are the fundamental goals of all of your system of care work as you've defined it. So we can visit this in more detail as we get going. There are unique implications also for our regional center partners, right? Making sure that their resources and their vendor networks are more deeply connected to kids in and around their systems, because often the comorbid nature of a young person with a deep developmental disorder, right, or an intellectual challenge, those kids are going to pop over into other systems as well too. And so it invites this obvious nexus of how do we consistently come together in local communities to make sure that our kids are resourced effectively, right? And not wait for them to have a crisis, to default, to need a placement that sometimes is not necessarily effective for their well-being. So with all that by context, let me begin to reflect on the opportunity that's before us, right? So within an advanced or enhanced or expanded interagency placement conversation, there are numerous opportunities that are not necessarily written into your current practice, right? Like your policy may not reflect that. But some of the things that you'll hear reflected in our conversation with Calaveras, and we'll talk about some other counties here in a few minutes, is IPC can become a place where we more effectively support things like permanency placements outside of the STRTP, right? Like how do we mobilize services to keep kids in a more community-based setting? There are federal timeliness to care standards in schools and behavioral health systems. Your parallel partners have obligations for kids that may not be approaching an STRTP, but they're still in your county and they're still in placement somewhere, or they have needs for behavioral health or school-based services. And those partners have timelines that are federally or state standards, and those have to be met. And there needs to be a place to coordinate that information, right? Obviously, the gold standard of practice for our ICWA involved families can be better coordinated through something like IPC. In some counties, we are experimenting with how does the inter-county transfer process nexus with IPC and care coordination. Obviously, an emerging area of opportunity here is we've stood up this new network of supports through CalAIM, right? Through enhanced care management and community supports. What does that nexus look like? And how do we ensure that kids that are in public systems that are now getting ECM or should get ECM, how do we make sure that that coordination is happening, right? And then obviously access to health and human services beyond foster care. So this is the larger imperative and opportunity that comes with being in a system of care, if you will. And we'll hear an exploration of this as we go further into our conversation today. Some of you may be interagency leadership team members or involved in the leadership of your system of care work. And so a couple of thoughts here about the role that the necessity of awareness for your interagency leaders, your department heads or your deputies, senior managers who are designing and building your system of care work to understand that care coordination happens at multiple levels. So we don't want any confusion, right? This first row represents the practice level, and it takes lots of forms. Most often in welfare, it's child and family teaming, right? But teaming happens, you'll see in column 3, row 1, teaming happens in lots of other ways. And care is coordinated there. That's one of the primary purposes of the teaming process, right? What we want to suggest with this little matrix is that when that teaming process isn't working effectively and you begin to get more complex needs emerging that the team can't meet or is not meeting, then you elevate the conversation to support the team, right, into something akin to an IPC process, right, regardless of what you might call that. And then that process over time gathers data about capacity, opportunity, need within the community, and you can elevate those needs up to your interagency leadership team, right? And there are lots of ways to do that, which we can talk about over time. So really important to understand that while the AB 2083 MOU was focused on foster youth with trauma, as a definition for a broader system of care and to the impact desired, that's a little bit limiting, right? Like you can't do, the research suggests you can't do system of care for a small cohort of kids. It won't work. The cohort has to be large enough so that your return on investment of the interagency work can actually pay off. Many counties, many of you are in these counties, you'll hear from Calaveras again in a moment, they have intentionally defined their system of care population in their MOU to be broader. That's by design so that the impact can be felt and the benefit can reach a full cohort of kids. The use of enhanced and expanded IPC or shared service planning is the best way to address challenges that we have with many of our complex youth, right? Some of you are wrestling with this still in a post-CCR environment. We have kids that are not in appropriate placements. And IPC is the place to collectively come together to share responsibility for those young people, right? And so we want to make sure that as you ponder on this opportunity, making sure that the partnership with tribes and that the awareness of your ILT or executive advisory teams is fully present there. So here's where we're going to begin really quickly to try to frame the opportunities, right? So there are really two ways that either historically or in the last few years, some county interagency placement committee processes have evolved. The first is in this left-hand column we call timing, right? And so it's a relatively simple approach which suggests that we're going to keep the population of IPC kids limited to just our adjudicated kids, just our 300 and 600 kids that are in the system in a formal sense, right? However, we want to recognize that waiting for a 14-day notice or waiting for a placement crisis is too late. And so elevating the IPC conversation much earlier in the care delivery framework or time frame will give you a chance to get ahead of the crisis for kids that are in delinquency or dependency systems. Does that make sense? That's the first and most simple way. And in a large county, that might be the right thing to do. We'll orient in a moment or two to Sacramento's effort really briefly. The second opportunity that is present for us is to recognize that there are young people at risk of entry to welfare or probation whose care could and should be coordinated across the full ecosystem. And by adjusting the parameters and the outreach and the way your policy works locally, you can invite a conversation so that all partners come together in consideration of those young persons' needs as well, right? So we're then saying to ourselves, we're not going to wait for a kid to be just in welfare or probation. We're actually going to convene a routine conversation so that kids who have high needs in schools, kids who have high needs in regional center care, kids who have high needs that are in our tribal communities that we might not know about, right? We're going to create a pathway for them into a conversation so that we can effectively, again, keep them at home, in school, out of trouble. Those are the two kind of overarching frameworks. What's really important, captured in this third column, is that regardless of which of those two efforts you encounter or try to lean into, if that's the direction you want to go, regardless of those two, what's critical to understand is that the facilitation process, the teaming process within an IPC is not it's not a typical multidisciplinary team case review, right? Like often our IPC processes around the state have become just case reviews, and we hear the case and then we bless it, thumbs up or thumbs down, right? Like yes, STRTP, or no, let's do something else. The reality is that process really, when it's evidence-based, should be very focused on this team developing resources and supports and putting those resources and supports into place in support of your team, right? Whether it's a child and family team or a student study team or wherever that team is located, right? Like bring those resources to bear. So these are this is a framework for how this work can evolve. Here's a quick look at some examples of enhanced criteria that many of you in some counties, which we'll talk about in just a second, are leaning into. Not waiting again for a crisis, right, or for a placement demand. So when the child and family team struggles to meet or identify needs or resources, that could be the trigger, right? Like let's go to IPC because we're not effectively meeting this family's needs as a team, right? When the family asks for a new team, that should be a sign that there's a problem brewing, right? Like the engagement's not present. What are we going to do? Maybe we should elevate this so our managers and supervisors at the IPC level can help us, right? When there's a conflict about who pays for what services, right? That's a clear sign that we should be talking about it in IPC. When a youth has multiple admissions to inpatient care, right? Like that should be a trigger. Any child in the regional center care where the family has asked for mental health or other supports beyond the regional center's capacity, that should be a line of sight to an IPC conversation potentially where other partners can mobilize, again, to keep kids at home, in school, out of trouble. Many other opportunities. This is just a partial list. Obviously, in a CalAIM environment, if there's a young person who is in need of enhanced care management or the family needs community support services, IPC can be a place where we communicate about that. Here's another elaboration about that. What the IPC can do in an enhanced environment. We can plan for discharge work from a high level setting, whether it's a hospital or an STRTP. We can divert kids out of institutional care, right? We can review the delivery of and collaboratively coordinate care for young people who are presumptively transferred. We've been wrestling with presumptive transfer for a number of years now in California. What if we used IPC to collectively address that? And at least then the team is aware of the collective needs, and we can address those needs more as a system rather than like kind of leaving that to just the behavioral health authority or some other partner. Obviously, the big goal here is to expand access to the local systems continuum for all partners in the system. If you're mindful about the opportunity here and you're interested in leaning into this, there are some developmental considerations. And here is a kind of a high-level list. It's critical that you understand that the leadership team needs to be aware that you're doing this. You're not on an island. So don't engage in redesign of your interagency placement committee process without talking to your ILT folks, right? Really important, we have found, to conduct some kind of a functional inventory of the interagency case coordination meetings. Some of you are in big counties where there could be parallel conversations taking place about how do you coordinate care. And so you don't want to re-engineer IPC unnecessarily. So you got to understand the landscape of where are all the other meetings where we're already talking about kids from other agencies, right? Do that analysis so that you can make a much better decision about where to go, which direction to go in. Really important to observe your existing IPC process. So if you're a manager director, deputy, and you haven't been to IPC for 3 years, would strongly encourage you to get there and observe that. And then you want to take a look at your outputs, right? So you need to understand, at least at a very high level, what's our process resulting in? So are there data points like utilization outcomes, like the number of youth referred to IPC who are not approved? How many kids do we divert, right? How many placements do we prevent? What are the number of 14-day notices in our county, right? How many state TA requests from partners have we made in the last 6 months or a year, right? Like these are big data points that might give you a sense about the landscape to know whether or not this is an opportunity that you might want to lean into. Obviously, a big step here would be to engage your critical CBO partners and to ponder with them on what their role is relative to IPC process. So there are some early explorers, what we would say early implementers maybe of enhanced IPC, including Calaveras that you'll hear from in just a moment or two, Nevada, Kings, Tuolumne, Tehama, Santa Clara, Sacramento, Los Angeles. You could be in one of these counties or others that we're not aware of, right? So we don't know the whole state landscape. It's hard to track in a dynamic environment, a big dynamic environment like California. So there are many counties that are leaning into this opportunity to seize whole child care within an IPC environment. There are also historic users in places like Placer, Shasta, Butte, Santa Cruz. You could be one of those counties where for many, many years now, they have seen IPC not as the pathway to STRTP, but IPC is the place where we keep kids out of STRTPs, right? That critical mindset difference, those counties have been practicing that in large measure for many, many years. There is no prescription against calling an IPC process something other than IPC. So it can be a placement prevention team like they use in Shasta. In Placer, they call it a Family Resource Community Collaborative. Tuolumne calls it an Interagency Resource Committee. There are lots of other names in use, and it's important to name this something that will give it some power, if you will. So lots of information there, and I probably exceeded my time, but we're going to jump right into our Calaveras partners, and a deep appreciation to Christina Smith, who's with the Calaveras County Office of Education. She is a director of student supports, I believe, and I'm probably butchering your title, Christina. It's been a while, but I hope that that's close to what your title is. And to one of her system of care leadership partners in Calaveras, Maylee Johnson, who is the director of social services, I believe, in the Health and Human Service Agency in Calaveras. And they are going to talk to us about their journey into kind of enhanced interagency service coordination, and they're going to tell us all about that. Good morning, Maylee and Christina.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
We're really excited to be able to present this. It's been a labor of love in our system of care for a very long time. So as Richard said, I'm Maylee Johnson. I'm the Deputy Director of Social Services for Calaveras County. And Christina Smith will be helping me with this presentation this morning. And she is the Director of Student Support Services for the Office of Education. And she's also the co-lead for our System of Care Advisory Group. So her and I work on a lot of projects together around helping our system involve kiddos and keeping kids out of care. So our care team, we call it the care team. Our care team model was really spearheaded by our Office of Education around 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And it's a multidisciplinary team model that we use in our system of care to connect families to services and supports before they're in crisis. So what we know, and all of us working in child welfare fields, is that youth with complex needs often have those complex needs before they come into our systems. And so we're really looking at an approach on how to get there before they come to us. Our care team consists of our 2083 advisory team members, as well as like our special education, public health, our eligibility and employment services. We have victim advocates, community-based organizations are represented there. And as we were building our system of care MOU and looking at where the IPC process fit in, we were really sensitive to the time and dedication that we needed to keep the engagement alive and affect the real change with families that we were looking for. So we kind of put our heads together and said, this already exists for us, and we're going to house it within this care team. And so we agreed that we would just revise our care team to include the coordination for the IPC process. So the way that this really works is when we have an IPC need, we utilize our care team referral process, and we designated it 300 and 600 so that the coordinator knows that it's an emergent meeting and needs to be scheduled quickly. And so part of those meetings, the social worker, their supervisor, and the QI are invited to that initial meeting, along with the child's therapist or any in-home providers, anyone that's working with that child. And during that IPC meeting, the social worker will present the case, and they speak to what's going really well, what are the needs, what are we looking at that may require a higher level of care. And then the team has the opportunity to offer what they can contribute to assist in placement stabilization, agree to an appropriate level of care. And then the social worker and the QI can then take that and research options for STRTPs that may meet the needs of the youth so that we're not just looking for beds. And that's been really impactful. And it's especially helpful to help us prepare for CFT meetings because it helps guide our conversations a little bit better. We're able to focus the conversation on services and supports that can maintain the youth in their current placement. Or if the needs are really just as significant enough to warrant this short-term residential treatment, we have the ability to know and understand what specific specialties we're looking for, how do we best match it to the needs of the child, and then be able to explain that to the family and the youth in a way that makes sense to them so that we're not just jumping into a congregate care placement. We're really saying these are the needs and this is why we're choosing this route. And it allows us to present the youth with different options for STRTP placement based on the services it provides, so that it helps to make that connection and get the buy-in sometimes for you. We really have focused in on the development of this and how we wanted to really focus on, yes, it's our foster kids, but we do have a really high level of kids that just, their families are either the schools are struggling with them, like Richard was saying, or the regional centers or mental health, and they need services and support. And so we really started to focus on expanding our care team out to reach these families and support them before crisis occurs so that we can make a greater impact. So with that, I'll let Christina explain how the care team works.
Thanks, Maylee. Hi, everybody. I'm Christina Smith. I'm the Director of Student Support Services at our County Office of Education in Calaveras. I'm joined by Melissa Harvey. She's the manager of our Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program. And exactly what Maylee just said, this really grew out of our need to serve more than just foster youth. So we had a really, really solid foundation and partnership when we started this between child welfare and the Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program. That's really kind of what launched this, as we worked really well together as a team. But we started noticing from our Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program, like, hey, we've got these education for homeless children and youth that we need to serve as well. So we kind of branched into our homeless services. And then from there, our SELPA was like, hey, can you get one of your little meetings together for some of our special education kids? And so we kind of just kept growing. And all of that really, really stemmed from us taking the time to build relationships with each other and to collaborate as partners to serve our kids in this county. So when we sat down to kind of map out our last school year, we came up with 2 goals for our team. We all sat down as a team and we said, what are our 2 goals this year? What do we want to track? And those 2 goals were collaboration and prevention. And we mapped out really how we wanted to do that. And our collaboration was that as a team, we're going to show up for each other. We're going to attend each other's meetings. We're going to go to CFTs. We're going to invite people to CFTs. We're going to show up at 504s, at IEPs, wherever this kid needs a team, our team is going to be. We did a lot of cross training together. Anytime we had a care team meeting where we had some extra time, we would really be intentional about asking each other questions like, what do you guys do in a situation like this? Hypothetically, what do you do here? Because we wanted to learn about each other's processes. We wanted to be curious about each other's processes. And we came into those conversations, not judgmental, not pointing fingers, but really teach us how you do this. Teach us why you got to this decision as child welfare, because we as educators don't know. So we really spent a lot of time collaborating and talking with each other to build this trust as a team. And now as a team, if there's an emergency, we all show up for each other. We say, yep, we can meet today, 3 o'clock, let's do this. But we were also intentional with our time in that last school year, so 23-24, we only met one Tuesday a month. We carved out one Tuesday a month for our care team, and we held that space religiously no matter what, whether we had kids to talk about or not. That was our time as a team, and we met. Through that school year, we served 15 families through our care team process. None of those families went into child welfare system. We prevented all of them from going into such a crisis that child welfare had to detain them. So that was really a win for us. Because of our success last year, we decided this year, let's add another day. We don't know if we'll fill it or not, but let's add a second Tuesday. So now we hold every other Tuesday on all of our calendars. In Q1, we already served 15 families. So we're going to serve a whole lot more than our 23 families this year for sure. But we are now holding 2 days a month together as a team, 2 hours. We split one of those days. The first hour, we talk just CSOC business. It's just a business meeting for our CSOC conversations, trainings, how's everything's going. The second hour is referral time, where we really get into the weeds with usually 1-2 kids. We try not to do more than that because there's just not enough time to really dive in. And then the other key thing that we started incorporating this year is if we can have the family present, we want the family present. And that has made a huge difference to talk about what's going on in that family with those parents, with those kids in the room to see how can we really help you. So those are 2 big takeaways. The last thing I will say that really makes the care team function is our navigator. You have to have a person. I know we're a beautiful team, but you have to have somebody who holds everybody's information. That person does the emailing, the coordinating, getting the parents there. And without that person, the team would not function because we all need that person. So our care team navigator is on this call. Her name's Susan. She's fabulous. But she keeps us in line. She makes sure we are all at our meetings. She makes sure if in a meeting with a family, if we say we're going to do something, we do it. Otherwise, she's going to call us and she's going to say, hey, did you do X, Y, and Z? We're having a meeting next week. You better have your stuff done. So I would say on top of the relationship building, on top of setting goals and holding time, you have to have a person. So that's really it from the education side of things. Thank you for having us. If you have questions, let us know.
So this is some of our mission and impact. So we want to provide responsive, holistic support systems that prioritize the well-being and stability of families in our community. And it really is what Richard said. It's really a shift in thinking and embracing the fact that child welfare systems can't help kids as well as an integrated system of care can help kids. And so I really started that shift in Calaveras County in child welfare. We operate from the North Star that if we woke up tomorrow and the law changed and we could no longer remove kids from homes, what would we do? Right? So every decision we're making in our practice and how we're working with partners and how we're looking at our systems comes from that. So how do we support kids and families in their homes, in their natural environments, whenever humanly possible? Like we know and understand, of course, that there are times where we just cannot. Like there's not a way to do that and still keep kids safe. But I've over the last several years kind of shifted that mindset into like, how do we keep these kids safe? And so, like Christina said, the navigator role is extremely important because they keep us going, right? We have somebody that even when we are like, oh, we have to have this meeting, or oh, I need to, follow up with this, she will send follow-ups and reminders and just really help keep us going. She really ensures our accountability to each other, but I think at this point, because we're such a a group that's built so much trust in each other, we hold each other accountable as well. And we do take it very seriously to fulfill our commitments because it then becomes our you. So what we did was for the child welfare folks on here, we took the child family team meeting process and adapted it to a prevention model. So we've created a child and family team for every family in our county that needs the help and support, and we meet the needs of those families. So we bring kids and families in there. We've had several families where we've brought them into this conversation in a moment where when we're talking about these initial referrals, I'm like, oh my gosh, these kids are going to end up in my system. And we were able to successfully support and prevent them from even getting referred. Like, we did not receive a child abuse report. And it was really powerful in those moments to say, look what we were able to do. Those families don't have to deal with us. They can be okay on their own. We've brought family members and supports for the families in there. We had a youth who was getting ready to graduate that was a regional center client. And he actually asked to come into this care team meeting to help him plan for adulthood and graduation. And so we were able to make a lot of connections with him and his caregivers around how he could get support after he graduated high school. So there's a lot of things that it really opened for us around, like, they don't have to be in child welfare to get the services and supports. And we bring the decision makers to the table who can make action happen. And it's just been a really impactful thing for our community. So this is how we do it. We kind of talked about this already. We have found that the in-person meetings are much more impactful than virtual meetings. So if you can, when at all possible, get together in a room, because it really helps the engagement and the building of trust when you have those in-person interactions. And they really do bring more perspective to the table. Sometimes, in Zoom meetings, you get the people that are just quiet and don't really want to talk, and it's just much more natural setting for folks to be able to really share that. And we do a lot of continuous improvement conversations around how do we want to build and expand on this. So we've played with a lot of ideas around like CalAIM and doing like community health workers and how would that fit in, utilizing the wellness coach program and how would that fit into what we're doing. So we're looking at a lot of different things and continuously trying to make this bigger and better for our communities, get the word out to more partnering agencies, and try to really, it's tying in really well to our comprehensive prevention planning because we're able to create community pathways in this way. And we're now toying with the idea Calaveras County is creating its own prevention unit within child welfare, where we can actually refer and coordinate with the care team through these families that are in either voluntary family maintenance cases or maybe it's an evaluate out referral, but it's a supportive poverty type issue. We can connect them in with this care team and still have the navigation support of Susan, the support of all the team members. We can typically find a lead agency that will take the role within that team and be able to really help families. So we're really excited to see where it goes. That's it.
All right. Deep appreciation to Maylee and Christina and Melissa. Thank you for joining us today. And they're going to hang around for a few minutes when we get to our little peer-to-peer informal and be available to answer any questions further. And as promised, we got a quick look at 3 other counties that have in recent years either begun to explore what enhanced IPC might look like or begun development implementation of enhanced IPC similar to Calaveras. So I'm not going to go through all the details of these slides, and we do have a few folks, I think, from each of these counties that are here and are also going to join us informally in our peer-to-peer. So appreciation to them for helping us set a landscape here for what their work looks like. In Sacramento County, big county, right? Their meetings are routinely scheduled. They meet every week. Also, it obviously depends upon the number of young people in care. They have linked their IPC work effectively to their system of care partnership via their MOU, and really powerful to help your leaders understand that interagency placement committee work is not on an island, right? Like it's part of the system. So all of the agencies have a role in ensuring that kids are safe, well, at home, in school, out of trouble, right? So in a recent strategy conversation amongst their ILT partners, their interagency leadership team partners, they've identified IPC as a focus, one of 7 areas of functional practice improvement and alignment. So their leadership team is very focused on seeing this take shape. In a big county, you can imagine Sacramento might take a thoughtful, iterative approach, right? Because the impact in the administration operationalizing of the IPC will be profound in a big county, right? So you've got to be careful and thoughtful and planful as you do this. Their goal is to increase families' capacity and access resources where needed. Their work also dovetails with a significant effort underway in Sacramento to expand their community-based intensive services continuum, something akin to what you may know as super wraparound, enhanced foster care kinds of services, right? So there's that continuum. You can't divert kids out of STRTP unless you have the continuum of supports. And that too is a system of care functionality, right? Which you do with your partners. And they are confident that in Sacramento, it's going to provide a reduction in the number of ad hoc case discussions, the number of informal multidisciplinary team meetings they have to convene. Certainly, the hope, I think, everywhere is that we'll have less demand on local and state partners for technical assistance meetings. They have identified that's going to take a couple of years, and their first effort here is going to just be to expand the criteria for young people in welfare or probation to get access to IPC, right? So they're not gonna blow it all open too big in Sacramento, right? They're simply going to say, how do we get to kids a little before the crisis, right? So not waiting for that crisis moment, not waiting for the 14-day notice, et cetera. So they have, with the help of a really experienced former county manager, they are embarking on a conversation inside the IPC team to develop a strategy and adjust the criteria for referral for those kids, if that makes sense. So it will increase the number of kids going into IPC, and the payout is it'll decrease the number of kids going into STRTP, if you will, right? So that guidance is all being worked on. That's a quick look at Sacramento County. Kings County has taken a fascinating approach. Their work is rooted in their system of care as well. And they will often reach out through their IPC process to include others who might be necessary for that particular young person and to coordinate their care. They have, as you heard Calaveras talk about, a coordinator who will set up and schedule their meetings, and within a couple of weeks of referral, they can convene that team. They've noticed some positive impacts already in their early experimentation. They've got more consistency in their practice and their relationships. They have strengthened their prevention diversion efforts. You heard Calaveras talk about this, but Kings is seeing a couple of cases where this is also true. And in addition to coordinating resources for youth, they've learned about each other's systems. So this is a critical part of the implementation of enhanced IPCs. You have to know the landscape, right? So there's this deeper awareness in and around the critical partners in Kings for what each other does, right? Which just by itself leads to potentially greater access to care. And they're going to have, we're confident, some really great outcomes in Kings. In Tuolumne County, it's been a couple of years since they started their journey, and they have done some experimenting and are developing policy and practice around this. They renamed IPC the Interagency Resource Collaborative. So similar to Calaveras, when they have an IPC requirement, they just pull it into this process, right? They're holding these at a fixed time and place, planning to enhance the frequency of these. All the representatives are there from their system of care. They have similar to Calaveras, also embarked on some strategies to link this to their comprehensive prevention plan work, right? So recognizing that there's an opportunity to dovetail the CPP community pathway work through this interagency work for the right kids. And they have, some of you are familiar with the Unite Us tool, and they are bringing that forward as a central kind of an enhancement to their information coordination access referral processes. If you know what Unite Us looks like, we can't explore that today, but it's a really interesting tool that can potentially augment the way care gets coordinated. The important thing that Tuolumne has embarked on, and we were just out there this week doing some more training on this. So thank you to our Tuolumne partners for helping lean into this with such passion. The facilitation process has to be strengths focused, right? Like this is not just a case review. It's not a grand rounds. If you've ever been to a hospital grand rounds where you just talk about the patient, that's not what this is. We are there to develop resources to meet this young person's needs, right? So the facilitation process has to look like that. And then, of course, you can identify concerns, needs, worries, and challenges. The panel then brainstorms resources and services. And then from that brainstorming, they settle on a set of augmented services and supports. They go back into the child and family team or the pre-IEP or student study team or wherever that kid's located. And they say, look what the county can mobilize on behalf of your family, right? To help your family be whole and at home. They are revising policy and are working on strategies to engage and do outreach to schools and other community partners. Thought it was fascinating, their language in their MOU in Tuolumne. Thank you for your leadership in this regard. But just notice here for just a second, the way they've written this enhanced IPC methodology into their system of care work. This is language straight out of their pending MOU revision. All right. I think, Andrew, we're going to come out of the sharing environment here, right? And just do a county to county QA. I guess maybe first, let me see the time frame. Well, we got time, don't we? Wondering, there are probably questions in chat. I haven't checked that lately, but let me stop sharing and just invite everybody into this conversation like so. Andrew, where do we start? Are there questions in chat that we can tee up, or do we want to open the audio for folks?
I think can we first start with questions for Calaveras, Tuolumne, King, Sacramento, the counties that you've lifted up, if there are questions for them. And then we'll see, I think we've got about 20 minutes, so maybe we can hear other questions for each other as well after that.
Fantastic. So feel free to use your chat hand, your Zoom hand, and we will we'll get you just in the queue, if you will. So questions, curiosities, observations.
We might want to start with the navigator function. I think there was a lot of energy in chat about the navigator, and Dr. Leo asked about funding for it, but can you talk a little bit about your county office of ed and how you are funding that position?
Yeah, so our navigator is housed in the Student Support Services Department. She is kind of funded through a couple different streams. One of them is our Title IV funding that we pull down. We also have a contract with County Behavioral Health, so they partially fund that position as well. And then the COE picks up the rest. But that navigator wears multiple hats for us. Because she's also part of that Title IV for foster youth. She does a lot of our support work for Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program. She does a lot of support work for our Student Support Services Department, helps us in supporting child welfare in pulling student reports for their court reports and investigations. So she does a lot of functions, but so navigator is really half of her job. So she does everything care team related in half time.
That's a big role, I'm just going to say.
It's a huge role. It takes a lot of coordination, and she spends a lot of time on the phone and emailing. So she hustles. Ideally, as we want to grow the program, we know that it's going to grow out of a half-time position, and we're looking at how to do that. So I would say if you are just starting out, just go for a full FTE. Just
I
do the
think
whole thing.
I think that sounds like a good plan.
Thanks for that. Other questions or curiosities? Other questions in chat? I can't see the whole chat box. But...
Yeah, I wonder, Michelle, can you talk a little bit about the Unite Us tool?
Sure. The Unite Us tool is, can you hear me? Okay. It's a closed loop referral system. So basically, hopefully trying to get all of our kind of resources eventually in there so that you can easily track what families are being referred to. But we're also using it as a kind of a tracking mechanism for our IRC so that schools and other agencies can possibly, so kind of using it as a community pathway as part of our prevention plan, so that schools and other service partners can kind of refer through that mechanism. We just recently onboarded it, so this week, and so trying to kind of figure out all of the kinks in that, and then obviously marketing this out into the community, but really as a mechanism to try to reach families sooner and then track what ends up happening. Because with IRC and kind of service planning and developing that, it's not typical that, you know, all of these agencies are working with them. And so making sure that there's follow through and so that we are kind of tracking what ends up happening after the IRC happens so that nobody falls through the cracks.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Question for Maylee around a specific funding out of your shop that supports that coordinator. Are there dollars that support coordination?
Yeah, we have a contract with our Office of Education around Title IV funding. And so it pulls through that contract, and Christina can probably speak more to it because I just signed it, but it's an agreement. It's around how the schools can draw Title IV funding as well for the foster youth services program. So it comes from the same pot that funds the foster youth services education program.
Yeah, thanks, Maylee. I'd reflect in general that many of you have employees on your teams who have, as part of their duties, the coordination of care function, right? You do it for dozens of kids, hundreds of kids all the time. In what ways can those people who already have that obligation potentially be part of a team that coordinates IPC related function, right? So you don't necessarily have to, if you're contemplating this and you're saying to yourself, wow, I'm going to have to fund a full FTE to do that, I would challenge that notion supportively and suggest that you already have people who do similar kinds of work. And can that be leveraged, right? Because you're not going to probably find funding solely, even in a big county, you won't find funding, solely to do this function. You're gonna have to partner, in other words. Let's see, Vicky, can non-dependent youth be referred to IPC? So yes, under that second scenario that we talked about earlier in the deck, this is what Calaveras, Tuolumne Kings, Placer, Shasta, others have been doing often for many years, right? You don't wait for non-dependent youth. You can pull that IPC expertise together and you bring that referral in and you say, what does this family need, right? We're going to mobilize whatever it takes for this young person to be successful with the family. That's that more expanded approach that will keep kids honestly out of the welfare and probation systems and away from all that trauma. And that's part of the technical assistance that CFPIC is ready to help with this. If you're interested as a county in that, and we'll talk about this more at the end again, is we're happy to help have a conversation and make some support available to guide or inform your thinking about that.
And to that, Richard, something I forgot to mention about how our care team works, we created a referral form that's actually public facing. So members of the community can self-refer into this, this care team. The school districts have it, all of our community partners have it. So it's public facing on the Office of Education site. And so we'll accept any referral from anywhere into this meeting to talk about it and see what our next steps are. Are any of us already working with the family? Who has contact? In order for us to make a better plan. So there's that. It's actually a public facing group.
Right on.
Yeah, and to add to that, there are even social workers that use that referral. If there is a situation that doesn't quite meet child welfare's level of response, there are social workers that will say, "Hey, can the care team help with this?" Absolutely. We've got principals, school counselors, teachers, of course. Teachers are probably our biggest referring agent. Behavioral health and probation chime in with kids, say like, "Hey, I've got this kid, I'm just stuck, I don't know what to do. Can we assemble as a care team and talk about this, talk about our options?" So even those of us on the team refer kids to the team.
Yeah. Thanks, Christina. Question around privacy and confidentiality, obviously an issue, right? What I think is standard practice is that you have an authorization to disclose information. You get an ROI, right? I have never in my nearly 40 years had a family say to me when I went to them and said, "We have a team of partners with resources and help and support that care about you and your family, and we'd like to have a conversation with them with your blessing. If you'd like to authorize that, we'll have that conversation." Nobody will tell you no, right? And
There,
so
oh, sorry.
all you need is an authorization to disclose and get permission. And particularly if you're inviting the family into that conversation like Calaveras does, then it's a non-issue, right?
And even if not, there's a reg around confidentiality and information sharing for multidisciplinary teams that we found. And so we all sign confidentiality agreements at the start of every meeting, which allows us to share within that MDT from that approach. So we took a similar approach to we implement a red team in Calaveras County. So I don't know if everybody's doing it or not, but we do red teams where we talk about our referrals that came in the day before, some case staffings if we need to. We utilize that same MDT style confidentiality regulation to invite our partners into that red team space. So like our education partners are there to provide their insight. We have employment services workers who are there to connect with families if we're not responding to a referral or something like that. They know how to better support. So we'll bring folks into our red teams under that same confidentiality MDT reg.
Right on. Thanks for that, Mealy. All right, let's visit a couple more slides and then we'll kind of tie ourselves up here at the end. And certainly you can put more questions into chat. Thank you for that. Enhanced interagency placement committee work isn't a standalone fix to young people's challenges with complexity and the challenges you have as a system, right? So obviously, it goes without saying that if your child and family teaming processes, if your practice level teaming and engagement work is not effective, if you have case carrying staff and facilitators and therapists and case managers who are struggling to implement good engagement-based practice, you're creating a pipeline into complexity. Does that make sense? If you effectively serve people at the most basic level with high engagement based practice, your CFTs work, then you're going to have fewer kids in complexity, right? It's an obvious connection point. We made this point earlier, but you got to have a deep well of community-based wraparound expertise because these young people need service in community, at home, in school, right? So we always make the recommendation whenever possible to expand that network or create that network or enhance that network of community-based intensive services in other forms, not just wraparound, right? So you may have behavioral health vendors who are doing intensive care coordination, in-home behavioral supports, ABA services, right? Like those folks all need to be connected in a network so that they can coordinate care for the young person. Because you don't want to pull a kid out of an STRTP or divert from an STRTP and put them into a network where their care is fragmented, right? So centering that as much as possible within a finite network of providers can be powerful. And obviously we made this point earlier, but your ILT folks need to have a vision for this. Summarizing this up really, until every child is everyone's child, there'll be some kids who are nobody's kids. And IPC is the place where you put that into action, right? The IPC is the connective tissue of your system of care. It's a place where you share stewardship, accountability, and risk, where you increase access and develop capacity. So we often hear we don't have enough capacity. My experience is, and the research suggests, I believe, that capacity development is a local conversation, and you can have that with partners when you understand what your kids' needs are. And that's the IPC process that identifies those. Then you share them upwards with ILT. A good IPC process will reduce your local costs, right? You'll have fewer kids in hospitals, fewer kids going out of home, fewer kids in crisis. It's a place where you can prevent foster care. We've already made that point. Some of you have emergency room relationships, right? And your kids are in emergency rooms, and you may have doctors and nurses and administrators in those hospitals that are not happy with the amount of time that it takes to respond, or to how quickly you can get a kid out of an emergency room setting, right? And a good IPC process can potentially help divert kids out of those settings. And of course, there are other benefits as well. Let's transition towards the end here and just reflect that there is some technical assistance available, as we mentioned earlier. We hope you'll see this as kind of a menu of services, but this is all customizable in the next couple of years. So each of these could be done either in person or remotely and can be tailored to your needs. So if you want to just have an orientation exploration process, we can have folks available to engage your ILT or to talk to your IPC teams to just begin to explore the vision, right? This can be as simple as a 60 or 90-minute remote conversation, to just have a conversation similar to what we had today, and then answer questions about how do you administer that? How do you operationalize it? Because it takes some time and energy to change the practice and the mindset, right? There are and can be training opportunities made available specific for your IPC panel and that facilitation process. You remember we mentioned the fact that IPC has to be a resource development opportunity. It can't be a case review process. And we are happy to make training resources available so that if you want to just leave your IPC process otherwise alone, but make sure that it's focused on resource development, that's a training opportunity, a technical assistance opportunity for you through this work with CFPIC. It may be as simple as taking a look at your written policy, and we could make recommendations back to you, to your IPC folks or your managers in regards to IPC policy, or to its elements of the MOU as it relates there. So if you want to have someone take a look at the IPC work as it's represented within your MOU, happy to do that. That'd be very easily done. So lots of different ways. And Laura here at CFPIC is your primary contact there, and you've got her email here on the deck. And I think that takes us to some final thoughts. Andrea.
I think Laura's going to say just a little bit more about what that TA might look like. And she's going to
Yes, thank you, Richard. So we are looking for some county IPC teams who would like to receive, the coaching and technical assistance that Richard just mentioned. Ideally, if there was one in each region that wanted to reach out to us, it won't be too much work on your part. That's what we're hoping. We'll step in and help with all of that facilitation that Richard mentioned. It's free, it's available. So hopefully you can talk to your teams about that, and please reach out to me if it's something that you might be interested in, or if maybe you are interested, but you need to ask a few more questions and get some more information about it. We are going to drop, or unless they just did, a flyer about the TA support in the chat. So please reach out to us for that.
Thanks, Laura. Other final reflections or thoughts before we sign off today? All right.
I was going to say that I also included information about our confidentiality pieces in the chat.
Thanks, Michelle.
That's great. And Michelle, if you want to share that example, your whole policy or whatever, that if you can, that would be great. I can send it to everyone just as a follow-up with tools from our conversation today. I'm happy to send an email in the next couple of days with all the stuff.
Yeah, so Andrea, I can send our ROI. We're still wrapping up our policy. It's still in draft form. So once that's all done, I will gladly share it.
Absolutely. And I want to just butt in and say one thing, that the TA that Laura talked about, we want to push TA out to local teams and support you how you want to grow, what your vision is. So we would tailor that TA to whatever you all want as counties. but we want to hang on to this work for the next 3 years. And so after we do some TA and help counties, we want to bring all the piloted counties back and do a webinar like this to continue to push TA out and learn. And so we want to kind of incubate the IPC support over the next few years. So this is just a beginning for us today. So yeah, tools as they come will be infused and sent out. So so thank you so much for sharing, Michelle.
Thanks,
Melissa.
Andrea. Hey, Melissa.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. This has been fantastic. I just wanted to share one final comment, which I think people do know, but I just think it's important to reiterate. All of these efforts also are demonstrating um, the extensive work that it takes for us to be able to prevent placement, help keep kids stable in placement, and really all the efforts around trying to prevent congregate care, but the work to expand home-based care that's appropriate is a other mountain of work, right? And it's just so important. But I think that the more that we continue to be creative around this and do sharing. So thank you for this webinar, Andrea, CFPIC, Richard. Um, it also helps to inform our state partners of what is still needed, right? When we think about things with funding and just fiscal impacts. So really being able, any county, to demonstrate the efforts so that when we are having those conversations, because I do believe our state partners really do want to hear, like, what we know they want to hear, what has been tried. And we've kind of all gone through, different TA and all of that. But really, when we're able to demonstrate what we're trying and still where we might be coming up to some barriers, it really, really helps to inform CDSS about additional opportunities.
Yep. Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate that. All right. Let's see, Andrea, I'll yield back to you or Laura at this point to tie us up and bring us home.
I think it's Laura.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. Thank you to our associations and our planning team that helped develop the curriculum and pull this together. And a special thank you to our counties that shared their stories today. Our hope today was that you would leave feeling inspired and hear something that you can walk away with that you want to improve in your counties. And based on the chat and a lot of the questions, it sounds like that happened. So thank you all for sharing your stories. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. Again, we will have the video up early next week, and we'll send that out to everyone that you can share with anyone that was not able to make it today. So thank you all so much, and thank you, Richard. I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Bye. Thank you.